For those looking for a liberatory martial arts learning approach and curriculum, we've created Liberation Martial Arts. It doesn't just teach you martial arts. It's also an approach to learning movement skills. The point of our program is to remove the need for a coach, to liberate you from the need of top-down instruction and toxic gyms. If you already have a coach and a gym, then you can apply our learning approach to improve your progress. LMA can also serve as a supplemental martial arts community to counterbalance the commercial gym you go to. You can also apply our learning approach to learn anything, and our practitioners are. They're applying it to all sorts of things, whether physical, mental, or even personal. It's just a radically different approach to learning. Thanks to Kami Zoe, Maggie, and Ben Mabbitt for signing up. Sign up for Liberation Martial Arts at the Southpaw Pod Patreon, or support us by signing up for one of our other tiers, or by becoming a sponsor. This will give you access to bonus content, transcripts, and uncut versions of our shows without breaks or interruptions. Sponsors also get a monthly training session with me. There's also ways to make one-time contributions. Find all our links at southpawpod.com. This is Sam.
This is Jason.
And this is Fight Study.
We are back with Fight Study. I am Sam, and I am once again joined by Coach Jason Sargis. Nice to have you back, Jason.
Good to be back, Sam. Good to be back.
So, from boxing to MMA to PFL to UFC, there has been no shortage of fights. But today we are here to discuss UFC 308, headlined by the featherweight showdown between champion Ilia Topuria and former champion and one of my all-time greats, Max Holloway. But before we get to that, let's just talk a little bit about the success Francis Ngannou has had since leaving the UFC. He just fought on PFL Super Fights, Battle of the Giants, getting an emotional win after his loss to Anthony Joshua, but also more importantly, and much more deeply tragic, the loss of his son, Kobe. And he made the fight look easy. And Renan Ferreira is actually bigger than Francis Ngannou and just poses a lot of physical threats. And there was a lot riding on the line, and Ngannou came through. And how could you not be rooting for him to win this fight, knowing how much he had on his shoulders? If he walks away now, he walks away a legend and a rich man. Even his boxing fights, he lost both, but he made a lot of money. And if he continues, he has options on the table, and I'm sure more ways to find success and get his name out there. He can just be a brand at this point. He doesn't even need to fight.
Well, I think, like you said, Francis lost a child barely 6 months ago. And by making the switch over to boxing, I believe he made nearly $20 million, if I'm not mistaken, for what was a significant beating he took from Anthony Joshua, and another $10 million for just a really impressive showing against Tyson Fury. I don't know what he made against Ferreira, but I believe it was around $10 million for that as well. But Ferreira also made $2 million, plus the $1 million he made for winning the PFL tournament. So that's life-changing money. That extra $2 million on top of that $1 million is really life-changing. And he did that because he went and stood his ground against the almighty UFC machine. And how do I say this? All right. I'll just come out and say it. You know, Dana White pushing any anti-Francis Ngannou narrative, bullshit propaganda, is propaganda that would make Joseph Goebbels fucking blush. You know, it now seems more accurate and appropriate to call the UFC the Dana White Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. But anyway, if you've seen anything that he said about Francis,
Just recently, too. even after his son died.
Exactly. It's as dishonest and factually incorrect as it is silly, juvenile, and fucking ignorant. And to make those statements that are just false and not wish a man who fought and made his name in your organization success in the face of losing his son less than 6 months ago is utterly grotesque. And I wouldn't expect that even from Dana White. So it's just a shame that, like, once again, Dana White shows himself to be who he truly is. And that's an absolute piece of garbage.
Now, let's talk about UFC 308. You couldn't book a better fight than Ilia Topuria versus Max Holloway. It's a fight in one of the deepest divisions between two of the pound for pound best. As shitty as Dana White is, he's not the matchmaker, and he has been lucky to have such generational talent. He didn't make these people. These people, like Max Holloway, like Ilia Topuria, it's just them. They're just different. They could have had the worst training. They would have still been special. They would have still made it here. It just happens like that. These are just special people who came up around MMA at the right time, and we get to see them fight. And they're both relatively close to each other's age, both close to their primes. Hardcores could not ask for anything better, and the fight did not disappoint. Jason, however, you've been saying Topuria is special in a division that is special.
Yeah, I've been saying that for years.
And that he's a future champ since you first saw him fight in the UFC. There's a lot of people who look special in 145 because 145 is good. It's just deep. So what made you think that, especially so early in a fighter's UFC career in one of the deepest divisions?
Well, I think, number one, I have a pretty good eye for talent. But before I say anything about that and pat myself on the back for what I think is being ahead of the curve, and I really was, Ilia receives a lot of hate from fans, at least from what I see on Twitter and whatnot.
Wait, let me add some context too. When he fought Ryan Hall, a lot of people thought Ryan Hall was going to beat him and then make his path to the title because he had, quote unquote, such an unusual style, nobody would figure him out. And then Topuria figured him out and made it look easy. So that's where we were at when you were saying this guy was a future champ.
Oh, yeah. And then everyone was saying, well, he's fighting a guy who can't strike at all. Anyway, even with all the hate that the man gets, Ilia Topuria, here's why he's hated, right? He doesn't need to be fucking clever. He doesn't need one-liners or the good guy, bad guy shtick that everyone's trying to work. He doesn't need that bullshit Tony Robbins WWE amalgamation, you know, the disingenuous bullshit that Michael Chandler throws at us. It makes my fucking ears bleed. He doesn't need the gift of gab, and he doesn't need to sell fights. He sits in disdain of the whole process. At least that's how it appears to me. And he acts like that selling fights is the promoter's job. Well, he just stays the course, getting better and better at fighting. You know, he walks and talks like he's the best in the world and above most of the foolishness that the UFC has brought continuously with their marketing creations and from the fucking Contender Series. And, you know, here's what I'll say. All right. I get a little bit loose-lipped and I can run on a little bit, but I'll just say this. And I honestly believe it. Max and Volk are my two favorite fighters of all time and two of the best fighters.
Yes, bar none.
And Ilia Topuria is simply better than the best version of either.
Wow. So not just who they are now, but the best version of them.
He is. He is just simply better. If he was giving you problems on your feet, you wouldn't want to take him down, and you probably couldn't. If he was having trouble with you standing, he could take you down pretty much whenever he wanted to. So his ability to mix it up and become a mixed martial artist at the age of whatever he was when he first started doing this thing, showed some really impressive skills. And even in the first couple minutes of the Holloway fight, when he decides to, you know, throw a few upstairs, level change, get that takedown, and then always throw that little feint jab and feint level change to keep Max a little bit heavy on that lead foot, and then chop away at it. Just showed brilliant game planning and a higher level understanding of this fight game.
But that's what you see now, right? What did you see early on, though? Because we didn't get to see him fight Max yet. So you didn't get to see that footage of him even fighting contenders yet. You said you have a good eye for talent. What was it you were seeing?
He was doing all the basics correctly, right? He was staying in his stance. If he would punch himself out of his stance because he swings big and he misses, he would bring his feet with him and he'd stay in his stance. He would feint. He could counter punch. He could punch heavy offensively and take the lead. He could punch in between punches. He kept his shoulder up, always pretty high, fighting behind his shoulder with his chin down. He threw punches correctly. And when he started to get tagged and started to always dip to his right, like wrestlers or people who have a good wrestling background or shorter fighters tend to do to avoid a jab, and started paying for it with some left head kicks. He corrected some of those little things early on. And it's that continued improvement. I hear it all the time. There's so much hubris in I've used the word disingenuous multiple times in the show. I use it again. This disingenuous attempt at like that you're tougher than the game and you don't have to know the basics and you don't have to drill the basics. The game's bigger than you and it's built around foundational skill sets. He started doing that early. He didn't talk about his power. All he talked about was how good he was at wrestling, in jiu-jitsu, and that his striking might be better.
Because he started grappling first.
Yes, he did. And he decided to learn how to box and box the right way and then sort of modify it for mixed martial arts. And he paid attention to the little things, the things that became avant-garde and were problematic, like the calf kick, like stance switches, like neo footwork. And he's got a recipe for success when people try just about any and everything against him, which tells me he's well prepared and he really understands this game. And he's followed it from a coaching perspective or with a coach's eye. And he's just as well coached as he is intelligent.
There were people who heard about Topuria before he even got to the UFC, not because they were paying attention to the MMA scene in Europe, but because Ilia Topuria, as a teenager, was already making a name for himself as just a jiu-jitsu guy. So when he was going to UFC, none of us even knew that he was a good striker. And because he was a jiu-jitsu guy, you don't know what the top end is. You don't know how good this guy is going to be. Maybe just like one of those guys who punches his way into clinch, pulls guard, or like has to take him down. And if they can't, they're in trouble. But then all of a sudden he comes out and it's like, you don't even know that he's a jiu-jitsu guy.
You have no idea from his last couple of fights against elite UFC talent. I mean, the elite of the elite all time.
We don't know what his MMA grappling is like per se, but that potential is in his pocket. That experience, that person that was really good at jiu-jitsu, that's still him. So he still has that for backup. So that's what makes him even more mysterious because he's the champion and you don't have that footage yet.
Yes, but he did toy with Bryce Mitchell on the ground after he punched the living shit out of him for however many minutes. So I don't know if you can like punch your way into an arm triangle and that tells you how good of a grappler he is. But he's definitely not lost there. I think he is abnormally strong and an excellent athlete. And I don't know if any of the UFC commentators listen to us, but I've said multiple times, like there are certain athletes in MMA that if they wanted to do a ball sport, they could. They probably have that sort of hand-eye coordination, vision acuity, and reaction time and reflexes to do something like that. And I think when John Anik said the guy might be able to play shortstop in Major League Baseball, he's not wrong that this guy has really, really high-level athleticism. And that matters too. The days of just technique in jiu-jitsu, big weight cuts, techniques in jiu-jitsu. It's athleticism will carry you a long way in this game, and he's got it in spades.
Because if you've both trained in the gym the same amount of time, you're both working hard, then what is the difference?
Absolutely. And we say talent beats or hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work. It depends how fucking talented they are. Because I can work pretty hard, and I'm not beating a lot of these guys. Even though no matter how hard I would work.
Now, having watched the fight as a coach, what was your read of this fight? What were the things that were important?
Well, first, let me say, I think it was my favorite fight of all time. I'd never been more excited for a fight. I was sick throughout the whole day. I had some sort of flu bug. I felt terrible, fell asleep early, and I woke up, and it was the only fight that I saw of that night. And everything that a mixed martial artist should want to know about the fight game, should want to see visually how a fight and a fighter should comport themselves, how a fight corner and team should carry themselves in cornering their fighter, the effectiveness of communication in between rounds, chin, cardio, technique, everything you want in mixed martial arts at an elite level was demonstrated in this fight. And it was, I'll say it again, my favorite fight of all time. And getting an Ilia Topuria that just knocked out Alexander Volkanovski, fighting someone who is as problematic from both the stance switching, height, just durability, like a chin on Max Holloway. Like, even though Max was the underdog, I had a feeling that he might be able to pull this off. I really did.
It was not lopsided. It was competitive, and it seemed like it was pretty close until it wasn't. The thing is, Topuria, once he runs away with it, he just runs away with it.
He does, right? And then there's little things you start to see, like as the fight unfolds and you watch it a second time. But when I watched the first time, if anyone would have said they scored it 2 rounds to none either way, I'd have said you're a dick, because it should easily be split 1-1 because they were both that close. If you had to pick, you'd have to pick, right? Seeing it in real time. When I watched it a second time, I started to notice some things a little bit differently. And I noticed about midway through the first round, Max was having a lot of success with the jab, or really the left hand from the orthodox stance. And then Ilia would look for the same technique again in counter, usually ripping a heavy calf kick, because to throw that lead hand, you got to be a little bit heavy on that lead foot. So and even with that early problem solving from Topuria, I think Max looked pretty sharp. I liked his volume, and he seemed to push off after exchanges like he did against Aldo, when he was like always pushing him off and getting back to distance and then peppering him with the jab and controlling space. And even when he missed or didn't land cleanly, the push-offs from resets of distance put him in a good position to come back with a nice jab. And that kind of volume, it does, it pays off. It pays dividends long-term over the course of 5 rounds. And it also gives the judges something to look at. So also the left head kick, which I think people have seen the way some shorter fighters tip to the right, especially when they have a bit of a boxing style. And when you got to contend with the jab and you're parrying, that power hand or right hand is occupied, that left head kick can sneak in there. I think Max threw it and saw some possibilities with it.
That seemed like a new wrinkle too, right? He's still improving. That was something that I hadn't seen a lot of before in fights. And he's like, oh, here's a new toy. I'm still getting better.
Exactly. And I was worried that sort of volume, I wouldn't have cared who won this fight. Like I said, it's my 2 favorite. The only thing I had really riding on Ilia was that I said that, like, how great I think he really is. But I certainly wouldn't have put money on him knocking out Max Holloway. And it did hurt my heart a little bit that's how the fight unfolded. But go back to some of the things Max really did well. He countered very effectively throughout the fight. And when Topuria would swing big and miss, I think it was at the end of the first round with like a big 2-3 combo, Max snapped back a nice 1-2 right at him. And then that was basically the end of the round, or estimate like towards the end of the round. And Max looked really strong with the jab at the beginning of the second round. And, a nice hook off the jab, and then he'd come back with a 1-3-2 and good movement, even though that leg was getting chewed up a little bit. And I think it definitely wasn't a knockdown, but I think part of the reason his feet were a little bit all over the place at times, and he caught himself square stanced in some of those stance switches, was because Ilia was chewing up that lead leg a bit. Some of the things the commentators were saying I thought were a little bit incorrect when they were saying Max was getting the better of the boxing exchanges. And anyone who disagrees with me, first hear me out, because I watched this a couple times. and also rewatch the fight. It's the times that Max looks really fantastic with volume and some nice combinations, working up the jab. But, Topuria as champ was able to sort of lure out some of those good boxing combinations from Max and counter with really heavy calf kicks after only eating a jab, or pairing a jab. And then after some of those calf kicks, he'd, put a solid right hand on Max. So like at 348, Topuria lands a strong calf kick in multiple combinations. And the commentary, DC specifically, was just sort of stuck in his own stream of consciousness and missed. If you hit a 1-3-2 and hits a nice dance switch and fade off, but the other guy throws a throwaway hook and comes back and snaps your head back with a big 2 while you're on the retreat. Well, I'm scoring that big 2 that has you running, has sweat flying into the crowd a little bit heavier than I have a slap jab, a slap hook, and a 2 that just grazes you. So I was seeing things a little bit differently. Again, I have the benefit of watching it a second and a third time, but even on initial listen, I thought the commentary was a bit all over the place.
Now, do you think Holloway going up to 155 and coming back down to 145 and being as big as he is and now as old as he is hurt him? Because usually fighters, as they age and keep growing, right? Because he started really young, they move up a division, but Max is staying at 145. Actually, he did move up and went back down. So do you think that affected his performance at all?
I don't know if it affected his performance, but I would not want to fight Ilia Topuria having fought at 155 and then come back down to 145. The chin tends to suffer. I'm not saying that has any bearing because, when you get blasted, you get blasted, but we've seen Max wear it pretty well. And by pretty well, I mean better than anyone in this fucking sport ever. So, the weight cut can make a difference. I don't know if it did. Like, again, I don't have the insight into his weight cut or his camp. And I'm not a neurologist. I haven't seen his brain scan. But like I said, I wouldn't want to be fighting Ilia Topuria, having an extra 10 pounds to cut when I already look pretty big fighting Gage at 55.
So you mentioned earlier that you think Topuria would beat the best version of Max. So now having watched it, right, with the benefit of hindsight, was this also a bad style matchup for Holloway?
Max, with his volume, his conditioning, and his chin, really has no bad style matchups unless someone can continually crack him, right? And for someone to continually crack him, they have to have speed and power and a chin. I think most people, and cardio. And I think most people fade in some of those departments, or else you don't have the power to put Max out. And he's just, that volume and that conditioning is going to overwhelm you.
That's why he points to the ground at the very end, because that's safest, because he knows he still has cardio. He's going to keep hitting about as hard as he has been since round 1. It's a trick, right?
They're a sloppy mess, right? They're a sloppy mess. He's still got it nice and tight, and he's putting it on you while you're just swinging for the fences.
It's calculated. A note to our listeners. If you love the Southpaw Project, please support us and help us get paid for our labor by financially supporting us on Patreon. This will give you access to exclusive bonus content, like transcripts, early releases of Southpaw Deep Space Nine, our fictional narrative podcast, Fighters Brew, break-free versions of our shows without interruptions like you're hearing now, bonus articles, Fighters Brew transcripts with extra content, Liberation Martial Arts Online, as well as our private chat group on Discord. You can also make one-time donations at Ko-Fi or show your solidarity by wearing our swag. You can find all pertinent links at southpawpod.com.
But now he finds this young kid, 27 years old, comes in and he's got a chin too. If you think I'm mistaken, take a look at the head kick he took from Hebert. Like, the kid can basically get hit with a baseball bat, come back and double leg you. So when you start considering the chin, like the problem is 145 is the deepest weight class with probably 3 of the best fighters, in my opinion, of all time in mixed martial arts. And Ilia Topuria just beat 2 of them. And I think Topuria is probably the third. People are going to say it's too early to say that. I disagree. And I think like when like the facts will bear it out long term when he continues to dominate pretty much whoever you put in front of him. You're not going to out wrestle him. Your best hope is that he either takes a bad step and blows out a knee at this point, or gets cut with a headbutt or an elbow. Like, he's just better than everybody else in this sport because he's taken a different approach. Again, I'll say it. He's gotten great at fighting. Well, these guys got good with their PR and marketing push. It's a different thing. And when you're the best fucking fighter in the world and you fully understand that you have the goods, yeah, you're going to sit through some of those press conferences and look a little bit aloof and not be as engaged because, like, he's so good, he's actually above it. And he knew it ahead of time, but he still had to play the game and he did a little bit of the talking. And I'll say it again, in my opinion, it's a promoter's job to sell the fights. It's a fighter's job to be a great fighter. And now we have what I think is a kid who's a generational talent among a couple of other generational talents at that weight class. And we got to see some pretty amazing stuff, So, if anyone says that Volk is washed, I promise you he is not. If anyone says that Max is washed, I promise you he is not. These are three of the best fighters in the world. And they just happen to fight each other in the last two fights.
Now, Topuria has a way of slowly moving his opponents to the cage. It's slowly but surely, which is sort of unique. How does he do it?
Pressure and composure, good defense, ridiculously hard power shots, feints, the threat of his wrestling, the fear of both his power and his grappling, So when you're a fully complete mixed martial artist with real power in your hands and legit boxing level boxing and legit like NCAA level wrestling and true Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, well, you are a real problem. And so there's a lot of things for them to consider. And when the power and the wrestling are both there, I don't know. It's got to make you at least think and be a little bit hesitant. And if you want to just try to throw hands, he's going to beat you to your hips and put you on your back. And if you try to fight with your hands low in anticipation of the wrestling, he's going to put that overhand right on you. So, what do? You better hope you got the chin and the reflexes to deal with him. And Max did pretty well, until he didn't.
Part of why I feel like Max lost his footing and fell early in the fight and often looked like he didn't have his feet underneath him even before he got rocked was because I think Topuria hit so hard that even when Max blocked or it hit Max's shoulders or forearms or chest, even though you blocked it, right? Like, you're like not taking it to the face. There's so much power, it just knocks you off balance.
Oh yeah, and it'll give you the blinky eyes too and make you just take a moment.
So I think that's why he fell over, was because the guy could have hit him to the hip and he would have just fallen over because he hits so hard. And I think Topuria even says something like that in the lead up, that people back up not because they want to back up, but once they feel his power, either they're knocked back, or even if they feel it off of their forearms, they're just like, I don't want to get cracked with that. And they start backing up. So part of that backing up is a product of his power, the threat. They talk about getting the respect. I think he just gets that respect early on. He doesn't need to crack you in the face. He could hit you in the glove and that'll get your respect. That's what I noticed about this fight, because Holloway has an iron chin, and for him to just back away and move the way he did just from like parrying the punches was like, okay, what he was feeling off the gloves, it was something different. And the way he was just being knocked off balance by that stuff. And I think there's one other aspect is when he gets people to the cage, it's not just that he's walking them down and walking forward. It's more like he takes a step and then that becomes his new spot and he won't give up that ground. That means that even when he comes forward, sometimes he'll jump back, but not further than that spot. So he'll take and keep. He keeps creeping, right? He keeps inching. So that's why I think it takes like a while for him to get them to the fence. because it's not him just like walking them down. He holds the position for a while. He's like, this is the position. I'm not going to back up from here further than this, right? I might come forward and I might go back to this position, but I'm not going to go further back than this. He keeps that for a while. He protects that geography, and then he inches a little bit forward. And I think because it's so slow and methodical, his opponents don't even notice that they're being pushed back to the fence.
Well, yeah, I think when you speak to someone's power and how they just inchworming their way into your space, and your body and brain understands that, I've seen it not just in this Max fight, but in other fights where he's hit people to the body and they do a good job of getting their right elbow down and protecting, but it almost looks like he hits them so hard it hurts their fucking elbow and then their body a little bit. Like even the blocking arm looks like it's getting it's taking a bit of a sting. And so you start to do that enough, your body has to process that pain, and then the pain is potential for injury. And when you do that, like that, there's a moment where your body just sort of pauses, and he's able to make up that ground. And if you have that little bit of fuck you as a fighter to crash the distance in against him and swing back heavy, if he wants to, he's going to beat you on the counter punch, or he'll beat you to your hips and take you down. Like that's what he does. That's the beauty of him being as well rounded as he is. And being a threat in those positions. But again, he's a fighter that likes to punch. He enjoys hitting people and hitting people hard. He puts full torque on it, but he also has some educated defense. He keeps his hands up. He knows how to roll with a punch. He knows how to typically keep his chin tucked. But like I said, there's a risk and reward when you punch as hard as he does and coming out of position, but he does a good job of keeping his feet with him. So like in doing those things, keeping your feet within this all forward movement and the ability to maintain your stance. And then it becomes up to the other individual to either make that ground back up and make it a firefight, which no one seems to want to do against such a heavy-handed kid, or you try to give up some ground. And he does a really good job of cutting people off and sort of staying in their face without being wild, overly aggressive, or most importantly, fucking predictable. He's just not predictable, and he just does the right things the right way. And his lack of predictability has a lot to do with just how fast he is. So, I mean, you may be able to predict he's going to throw a right hand because everyone's going to throw a right hand in a fight at some point, but it's his little pause and hesitation or feint and little level change, and then you flick out a jab, and he sees that jab coming, and his natural inclination is to bomb it overhand right, and then a left hook to the body, and then a left hook to the head after you try to step back and hit that jab straight. And he's putting that 3-piece on you. And I don't know if 1, 2, or 3 hit, but it doesn't really matter because if one does, it always seems to be problematic, especially when he backs you up towards that fence.
I'm sure there are going to be MMA pundits who analyze the ending and will pick apart everything about how Holloway moved near the fence. But in watching it again, I realized Holloway never recovered from the initial strike that knocked him back into the cage. So the ending didn't happen against the cage. It was actually when they were near the center of the octagon.
At 2 minutes and 48 seconds, that throwaway hook to the straight right hand.
Yes. After that, his feet were all over the place, and that's the shot that really did Holloway in. So rather than analyzing the final punch that put Holloway down and why he was moving that way, it's like he was moving that way because he had rubber legs. So how did Topuria land that right straight onto the granite chin Max so hard that it gave Max rubber legs?
Well, there were some good shots earlier in that round that weren't really picked up on because, again, some of the stream of consciousness you hear from the commentary team is if they have certain talking points they have to hit while real action is actually happening, they seem to miss. There was a huge right leg kick and a nice right hand from Topuria. And if you look at how Max moves when he gets hit with that right hand, he looks like he's shifting stances to a southpaw position, which puts him perfectly in line, not even perfectly in line, horribly exposed, getting caught in that transition with a right hand. I don't know if he was working off of that left hook to take that little drop step in stance switch, that little stance shift and come back with a straight left, but he just put himself in a bad position and just ate that right hand flush.
Something else I noticed about that final sequence and also other sequences where Max got hit was that going back to power and how power plays into strategy, even when Max blocked or parried or the shot didn't land clean and grazed something else, Max was feeling that power. So when those shots were coming in, Max's hands were so out of place. And it's like, why was it so out of place? It's because if he keeps it where it's supposed to be, Topuria will just punch through his hand and knock him out anyway. That's how hard he hits. So you know how like sometimes when you're parrying or you're blocking, you have to kind of really smack that hand away, because if you don't meet it with equal force, you will just hit yourself and then you will like hurt yourself because they will punch through your hand into you, right? That momentum, something has to come back, right? His glove, you have to meet it with some kind of equivalent force so that it doesn't hit you, right? So Max was reaching for that shot so hard, right? Normally Max doesn't flail like that, but he had to because that's how hard Topuria was punching. So my point is sometimes when you hit hard, it's not even that, oh, the guy doesn't know how to parry or the guy's hands were all over the place. It's like, no, they have to often parry or block like that just because you're hitting that hard, right? Otherwise, they will just break through your defense. They will break through your guard. And so Topuria knows that about himself. He knows how hard he hits. So he just flicked it out. He knew Max would have to respect it. Otherwise, it's like, okay, if you don't do that, I'm just going to punch right through you anyway. So it's like, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Max flailed and then the right hand came through. And I was like, why would he do that? And I was like, oh yeah, that guy must hit that hard that you have to parry or you have to block that much harder.
Yeah. But I mean, even going back to the things that Max was doing very well, he was doing that little stop kick. And then as he was scoring with it, you started to see Topuria start to pick up on it a little bit, even to the point where he gave him like the no. And then like at 48 seconds later, he knocks him out. Or like, you almost got it. And that's what I mean about Ilia Topuria taking in information. Like when he starts to lose an exchange, I don't think he loses it, because when you go to it again, like he's picking up on your timing and your rhythm and the success you're having. He's starting to be able to predict and counter, and he's a massively powerful counter puncher. And then he keeps his foot on the gas once he stings you. And just like you said, even when he misses or he doesn't land clean, this is both like a strength and a bit of a deficit. When he gets tangled up, he still punches. Now, that sort of set him up for an elbow, and he almost got clipped with another one on the inside that I think just missed. And the one that did land didn't land like point, and it almost landed like the meaty part of like where you get tennis elbow or epicondylitis or whatever they call it. It just didn't seem to land like it could have. But because Ilia hits so hard and he gets tangled from that sort of aggression, it makes you sort of, I don't know, have to regain your proprioceptors and figure out where you are in that space. And I think he's a little bit better in terms of like athletic prowess and proprioceptive awareness of resetting himself and coming back in with massive shots. And even his fast right hand that he doesn't load up on is still incredibly powerful. And it landed often, and it wasn't commented on enough by the commentary team because it wasn't his bombing overhand, right? And Max wears it so well. But when you start wearing 6, 7, or 8 in a fight, especially in a fight where your lead leg is a little bit compromised, well, I mean, there's only so many of those that you can chew on. And, a 5-round fight is 25 minutes to be taking that kind of punishment. So you started to see him wear it a bit, not quite as well as we're used to seeing him wear it. And I think when you get a guy who actually puts that kind of mustard on a shot, that's what you're going to get no matter how otherworldly your chin is.
When they did exchange, Topuria is much more planted down than Holloway, and Holloway is a little bit more uprooted, so he could kind of bounce around. So that also means Max isn't going to off-balance Topuria, but Topuria will knock Max around. So we saw that even in those kind of exchanges where they get tangled up. Yeah, you're equally tangled, but it's not going to be like Topuria losing his footing. It's going to be Holloway losing his footing, and that's what we kept seeing happen over and over.
Oh, you're 100% correct, especially even in that before the final exchange when he caught him with the right hand. Again, his footwork was a little bit all over the place because you have a 5'7" juggernaut, which is a bit of an oxymoron, but that kind of power coming with that kind of force, With that kind of speed, is a problem, and it's going to put you on your heels, and you're going to have to adjust, and you're going to have to try to reset your stance. And when you're doing that multiple times, you're going to be caught off balance. And when the other guy is a little bit more explosive, then you get what you get in that kind of fight. And you better hope that it doesn't land. And unfortunately for Max, Ilya did.
My final thought for Holloway is that Holloway is an MMA guy who can do everything if you make him. Like if you take him down, he has jiu-jitsu, he can wrestle back to his feet. But if you just let him do what he wants, he's just a striker. When you're studying him or when you're fighting him, it's not an infinite MMA universe to try to comprehend, right? He's constrained himself to this one thing. So for new people like Topuria, young guys coming up, that makes Max much easier to study because there's so much footage of him in that one aspect of MMA, and you don't really need to do as much homework in the other aspects. So my point is even though he was so good, and I think he's one of the all-time greats, he was so good in that one area, but that also means that that's the only one area that anybody needs to study. And because you fought so many times now for the UFC, there's so much footage of just that one area. Let's say there was just as much footage of you, this many fights, but you did everything, every fight, then they'd have to like try to break down every aspect. So the homework is so much more difficult. So this is where now in his career, his lack of well-roundedness, the fact that he doesn't fight in all these different facets of the MMA game is working against him. I think that's what worked against him against Volkanovski, who studies a lot of tape and is like, oh, well, Max, I'm only going to think about his striking. I don't have to worry about anything else, right?
Oh, without a doubt. But with that, you get the legend that is Max Holloway, right? That's what it's become. But he certainly would be a little bit tougher of a problem to solve. But he also had those fights against Volkanovski, which is a shorter fighter who has got a good right hand, and that's a lot of footage from a guy who's about, I don't know, the same height as Topuria for him to have studied. So when you talk about a volume striker who has fought as often as he has against elite talent, that's a lot of footage for you to study. Not against throwaway fighters who you could have done anything you wanted to, and you could have done. You are seeing tendencies that are actual true habits that are going to be very difficult to break. And you're also seeing a fighter who has the ability to continue to learn and evolve, even with as many fights as Max Holloway's had. So you sort of know what you have to contend with, but not to stand firmly on just the fact that this is who he is, that though he may not have shown that left head kick a ton, that it might be a new wrinkle he may bring. And I think as well coached as that team is. And I think one of the tweets was like, these guys are both making each other look vulnerable. I mean, vulnerable is probably not the best word. I think they were both just bringing out the best in each other. And that's why I say it's one of my favorite fights that I've ever seen, because of the way they've handled each other. Neither of them really had it going their way 100% after the first two rounds, but you could see moments where you thought the fight could be a little bit problematic for one and then a little bit problematic for the other. And I think the commentary had no ability to pick it up. Again, they got a job to do, so it's not quite as easy. But when you watch it, you see that these guys are masterful decision makers under duress. When shit's going down, and they have the cardio and the technical goods and proficiency to back it all up. And they did. And when shit was going bad for Max, he didn't just brawl. And that's what I liked about that, because you could say, yeah, he just laid it all on the line. I actually appreciate that he didn't just go wild when hurt and try to comport himself, get a little bit of distance and kind of come correct whenever he can get it together and survive and fight and give me more as a fight fan to watch. Rather than say he went out on his shield. No, man, let's win this motherfucker. Let's do that. Let's show me that you can recover in between rounds. But the average fight fan, like I said, is silly and ignorant and probably wouldn't appreciate it anyway. But what they were able to give us was what I've been looking for as a fight fan for a long, long time, and what I complain about on this show most often.
There's one thing you reminded me of when you said true habits. Because if you're a young fighter, you might have some habits that disappear, right? You could grow out of it. You could get trained out of it. But maybe, yeah, there are some habits now because Holloway has been fighting long enough where they're just true as in permanent features, because I'm reminded of something he said after his fight with Arnold Allen. He said Allen was doing good in that he kept catching him by taking a big step forward after the 1 and coming in with a big 2. I think Max said something like, my dumbass would just lean back every time he did it and I would still get caught. And he's like, I'm aware of it and I'm working on it and you're not going to see that anymore. And then we saw it over and over again in this fight. I remember Cormier said something similar years ago before he got knocked out with a head kick by John Jones, where he said he knows he tends to dip to that side. He's working on it. He's aware of it. He's going to stop doing it. So even if you're aware of it, to your point, maybe there are some habits that are just true, meaning they're just permanent features of who you are this late in the game, right? Maybe if it's early on, you could change it.
Yeah, and that's what Ilya kept doing throughout the fight. Was when he would miss on his 3, he'd step through on his 2, or he'd miss on his 2, he'd step through on his 3 and come back with another 2. And he kept his feet underneath him. And my old boxing coach, Billy Briscoe, said, I forget the exact words, but like, mistakes, I'll take them because you can fix those. Habits, tough fucking thing to break.
Good point, because it's like they didn't just become aware of it. They've been aware of it for years. And it's just like, nope, it ain't changing.
Well, it's one of the things you can do when you have a great chin and you are almost always the taller or longer fighter. You can get away with some of that stuff. And he has that nice little lean back hook that he hits people with.
Yeah, he threw that several times against Topuria. And I think each time they missed, meaning Topuria knew that was coming.
Yeah, and I will say this about Max's effort. If Topuria didn't have the chin that he had, it would have been an early night for any other version of Topuria. And if Max didn't have the chin he had, it would have been an earlier night for any other version of Max Holloway. That's how good these two were.
If you love the Southpaw Project, become one of our financial supporters. It'll help us supplement the cost of running this project, the incredible time and energy we put into it 7 days a week, and you'll be giving us some breathing room, not only to juggle Southpaw with our day jobs, but also to expand Southpaw into other areas. We can't exist without your contributions. Show your Southpaw solidarity by supporting us at southpawpod.com. There were like mini versions of that ending in rounds 1 and 2 as well, meaning he just didn't get hit as hard, but he got hit pretty hard. He fell into the cage, shoulder rolled, and then got out. And that's what he did in the end, except that punch was much harder and much more flush than all the previous ones. The sound was disgusting.
Yeah, I didn't like it. Again, I like being correct in how I call an athlete's development or trajectory in their career, but not really against Max Holloway.
Sometimes you could hear a good shot. It doesn't just have to be about how you visually perceived it.
But watch the left hook towards the end to the body, where I think it goes off of Max's elbow and into Max's body behind the liver, but still like a body shot that I think probably hurt him.
You could hear that too. You could hear it from Max kind of gasping.
Yeah. And that punch is hard. He whips it and torques it, right? Everything is like a perfect home run swing when he throws it like that.
Now let's talk about the co-main event between Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev. Much shorter fight. I saw Whittaker fight Yoel Romero twice. I never saw Whittaker get out-grappled like this. How did Chimaev do it?
I mean, how strong is this fucking guy? I don't know.
For the record, right? Whittaker's camp, or Whittaker himself, said his jaw is broken, and clearly in the pictures, he lost several teeth.
Hey, I broke my face like that as a child. I ran into the corner of a wall and I broke my jaw on the gum line, and the teeth just fell into my mouth. Like, they were still connected to the gums. I didn't lose any teeth. I broke it on the jawline. Like, I've got plates all throughout and some screws. It's really, really ugly. But it took me running as fast as I can as like, I don't know, a 9 or an 11-year-old.
As a kid with not fully formed bones yet.
Yes. Yeah. And this is an adult ripping another adult fighter's face off.
No velocity either, right?
None. Just squeezing.
Quick, too.
Yeah. So yeah, you just have to wonder, like, and that's not even a pretty shot. Like his takedowns aren't pretty, and he gets to your back and he just grabs you by the hips, and he, the counter wrestling that Whitaker was trying to implement was the correct stuff to do. Like it was right, but like I just don't know how strong Khamzat is.
I guess that's the hard part to prepare for is you don't know how strong he is until you get in there with him.
Yeah, and when you saw how easily he grappled, when he grappled Usman, you're like, Jesus Christ, I know how good of a wrestler Usman is and how strong he is. We've seen his body of work. And the first couple minutes of that fight, he out wrestled him like it was nothing. So it's like, thank the fight gods that this guy has a limited gas tank, or else he'd be killing people. So, I mean, I hope he never gets his cardio right, because I'm looking for some healthy competition.
Like if he just had a pure wrestling match, I don't know how well he would do against even like some of the MMA fighters. I think it's the fact that it's not even like MMA style. It's like a jiu-jitsu style, right? It's like so much of it is constantly threatening submissions that makes his wrestling so good. So it's like part of it is his strength, but part of it is his submission attacks and also his ground and pound. Without those things, if it was like a wrestling match with no submissions allowed, I've seen him do those. He's not as good when it's pure wrestling. But the fact that when he can start attacking the neck, attacking the arm, and also start hitting you, that's what makes his wrestling special.
Yeah.
So I think it's just the fact that once he gets you to the ground, he could use those other tools to keep you there.
Absolutely. He's also a bit of a piston puncher too. Like he has that nice straight punching where it always sounds like it hurts when he hits you. So, I mean, that'll make you pause a little bit. But it's funny. He doesn't fight like from a crouch stance. He fights really tall and then just basically does an odd squat and dives in at you and just takes you down like you're nothing, which is very strange to see.
I want to add to that because this isn't even my read. I was randomly listening to an interview with Eric Nixick, and I was listening to it just because I was like really curious about what's going on with Francis Ngannou, everything that happened in that camp emotionally. I wanted to hear more about that. But then the interviewer asked him about what he thought about this fight because Chimaev has been to Extreme Couture before. And so this is a read that Nixick had. And I think it's pretty spot on. They know once he gets you to the ground, Chimaev is really good. But what Nixick said is like what people don't realize and underestimate about him is he's really good at feints. And he saw that firsthand, I guess, when he was in the gym. He's really good at feints. And what he said about his feints specifically was the way he bounces up and down. Like he bounces up and down, and that's how he sets up not only his shots, but his strikes. And that's his main feint. Isn't like, these kind of feinting with the hands for the shots or feinting with the hips for the kicks. He bounces up and down. It's like very simple. And so knowing that from what Nixick said, because Nixick had spent a lot of time watching him, I was looking for that in his fight against Whitaker, and he was bouncing like Nixick said. And then what did I see Whitaker do? Whitaker bounced with them too. Whitaker went up and down because he didn't know where the level change was. And then I looked at what Chimaev was doing, and Chimaev was looking at him bouncing, and he's timing the bounce for when to shoot. So he's basically like, you're syncing with my rhythm. You're going up and down. So you don't know when I'm going to shoot.
Nice. Sneaky bastards. All right.
Yeah. So he's timing the shot off of that bounce because, like, I guess it's just psychological, right? If he goes out there, he starts bouncing, the opponent bounces with him. And the thing about Whitaker likes to bounce anyway. So I think he just easily gets caught into that sync anyway. And that was it. He timed that shot. And so that's why the shot didn't have to be that good, because he was shooting in while Whitaker was standing up.
That's really interesting, because like bouncing in that sort of karate stance with only a thought of striking. When you're looking at an opponent doing that, you look at your opponent and comes out. That would be the world's worst wrestling stance, right? That tall with your hands that high, and when he catches you bouncing too, he's like, all right, and how you've just taken the world's worst wrestling stance.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. He gets you to take the worst stance to defend a shot.
And he's just going to feint his nice jab straight or hook straight, and he hits pretty hard, or maybe he'll throw a couple, and then he just beats you to your hips. That's interesting. I'm going to have to watch some of that stuff again.
It's not that he has a good shot. He pulls you into taking a bad stance.
Yeah, because he fights so goddamn tall.
All right. The last fight I want to talk about is the light heavyweight fight between Magomed Ankalaev and Alexander Rocket. Now, why would I talk about this fight when the first two are so good and has such big names and these are like the fights for the hardcores, right? But it's because I am fascinated by Rocket. In so far as he seems to have all the potential in the world. He's gigantic for the division. He looks like a goddamn superhero figurine. Not even the actors, like the figurines.
Yes, he does.
And now having watched this fight, Rocket could have won this fight unanimously, but it got away from him because he's timid, in my opinion. That's what I'm calling it. That's my read of it. But the thing is, it's not just my read of it from this fight. That's been my read of him since his early fights in the UFC, or even fights he's winning. That's been the frustration of him, because when he first came in, because he's so athletic, everybody thought he was going to be like the next big thing. But like he's winning a fight and he would just like kind of back away or look visibly nervous that he would still somehow lose this fight against somebody he's clearly beating. So this ties into a conversation we had before we even got on air about how every time you try to leave the fight game, you feel the pull to come back, right? You want to work with fighters, right?
Yes.
There is something about working with fighters. So when you see a fighter like this, right, with all this potential, you as somebody who keeps getting pulled back into the fight game, you keep having an interest in working with fighters and working and developing them. What do you see with a guy like Rakic? What is going on there? Because he has all the tools that you want.
And he's beautiful on the pads. And every technique he throws, when he throws it individually, is fantastic. But you'll notice that he never exchanges. He doesn't fight him. He doesn't punch in between punches. He doesn't slip a punch and immediately counter punch, like with the three initiatives, right? You got your lead, you get your simultaneous counter, and your delayed counter. He doesn't delay counter, or rarely does. And he typically only takes lead off of several thousand feints. And it's feint, 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 right hand, feint, 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 right kick, feint, left cut, kick to the inside.
I think he's constantly hesitating in his mind, like, should I do it? And he's like trying to convince himself, do it.
It's just fucking fight, kid. Like, you got the tools. Go out there and fight.
The thing is, he also has a chin, right? We saw that against his fight against Prohaska.
Yeah, he's got a good chin, and he ate some flush left hands from Ankalaev. So I don't know what is causing him to have this inability to pull the trigger, but he doesn't look like he wants to fight in the gritty, dirty exchanges. He doesn't seem to want to. That's why anyone who says that he had a shot at beating Pereira is crazy, because Pereira loves like those dirty exchanges, and he'd absolutely eat him up. He's not just going to sit there, let him feint that jab and then just get blasted with a right head kick because he's never seen that before. Rakic has to understand that you have to actually fight in an MMA fight. Like, fighting needs to take place. And that means attempting to hurt your opponent. And if you can't do it with pretty technique from the outside, you have to do something else. And he doesn't. He just doesn't. So with that, I don't know what to say other than, like, your pad holder will stay at pad holding distance for you, but your fucking opponent won't. And if you can't deal with that, like, train differently. Like, figure that out. They said they brought in some of the best, like, wrestlers, and that's fine, but it's not a wrestling match. Like, what were you doing in sparring? Where was your, like, where are your elbows on the exit against the cage? When's your bump and create a little bit of distance, or create a little bit of an exit and send someone out and high kick? Where's your ability to pick someone out, like, in between shots? And he didn't take a takedown attempt until the third round, when it was relatively irrelevant. I don't know why his corner told me it was up 2 rounds to none, if that was a misinterpretation or something. I don't know. Like, all of it just seemed odd that he came to a fight looking like he was disinterested in actually fighting.
Yeah, his corner didn't seem like they were doing him any favors. Like, they seemed to be making that type of timidity worse, because they're like, yeah, now take it off. Take the foot off the gas because you were winning. So let's just be safe now.
Yeah, just don't do anything crazy. Say, all right. even if it were a kickboxing bout, it would have been a boring kickboxing bout, but it was an MMA fight, and it really didn't look like one. It just looked like a very mediocre kickboxing bout where one of the individuals who might have been the better one decided not to really try to win. And that's just how it looked. He looked disinterested and a little bit lazy. And I wonder if that comes from fear.
Ankalaev said it was the most awkward fight he's ever been in.
I've never seen someone faint so much, whether like what do I say, racing to a red light. I stole that from Matthew McConaughey. But that's what it seems like he's doing. Like, where are you going from there? What is the end game from all that fainting? A right high kick? Like, okay, all he's doing is covering hard high left, man. That's like, all right, try it again. Or to get overextended on a right hand because you fainted them outside of your right hand distance for so long that everyone just sort of bored in a little bit. You're so predictable, and then people were just sort of bored to sleep. That's okay if you have that sort of fuck you kind of explosiveness that you can come up with out of nowhere. But he's fairly explosive, but not that kind of offensive prowess where he's wowing anybody. Like, he's just not exploding like that. I think he might have it in him. I don't know, because he'd have to actually try it in a fight.
He has shown that in other fights, but then sometimes it looks like he scares himself after he explodes.
Yeah, sometimes being afraid of losing is the easiest way to lose, right? You think your way out of a win. I had a fighter named Anthony Terrell Smith. Normally goes by Anthony Terrell. He's a great kid, a great young man now. I don't really speak to him anymore, like typically happens with me and fighters. But this kid was probably the best natural talent of any fighter I've ever worked with. And he didn't have timidity. He wasn't ever scared. He lacked self-belief. He just didn't understand how good he was.
How do you differentiate the two?
I've seen this kid get mad and just put it on individuals. I've seen him get mad and punch himself into an easy takedown, even against me. And I've seen him just pitter-pat, touch spar with people and accidentally knock them out with a left head kick or a switch kick out of nowhere. I've seen he sparred Felder for years. He was one of Felder's chief sparring partners. This kid was 4-0 with 4 knockouts, I think all in the first round. Then he lost against a kid who was a better wrestler because he didn't improve position. My point is, if you can get someone who just doesn't have self-belief to understand if they turned it on and they actually fought, that 99% of the fighting world couldn't compete with them. That's what this kid was. And I wonder if Rakic is that sort of fighter, because he's still pretty good when he does nothing, because it's not like he's fighting the number one contender and he was basically a combination or two away from winning that fight if he'd have done anything.
That's what I mean, right? He does the Rakic thing where he barely does anything, except he's pretty close to winning.
Yeah. He's never given up anything huge except against Yuri. So he stays in it, but they do a little more. Come to fight, make it a little bit ugly. Don't make it a pad session, because it's not a pad session. Not every punch is going to be at that absolute extension striking distance. You got to learn to fight in the in-between spaces, in the muck and fray of it all, where it gets ugly, muddy, bloody, and blurry. And when you can do that, you can start scoring, and then people try to reset at distance, and then you can find that stuff. But no one's just going to stand there and be your highlight reel head kick knockout off of 8 feints. It's just like the sport's evolved too much, and with as many contender series shitheads is coming in, there's only a few more of those going around once you're in the top 5 or whatever he's ranked in the world.
So I'm sure a lot of fans don't care about this fight, but the reason why I cared about it was just specifically from the coaching perspective. And I would say probably most of the listeners of this podcast, they are just fans, but there are quite a few coaches who listen too. So I'm sure they might not care about Rakic per se, but they might have similar situations, right, to this. And so I wanted to pick your brain a little bit more, because earlier you said you had a good eye for talent. And one of the notes I wrote down while watching Rakic was baseball scout. I wrote old school baseball scout. And the reason why I wrote that is because old school baseball scouts, they just look for bodies. They're like looking for just athletes. And they're like, you got all the physical tools. I could teach you all the rest, right? That's what the pre-Moneyball old school baseball scouts were known for, right? But fighting is different, right? It's not just about physicality. So when you think about your eye for talent and you're looking at talent and you see somebody young and green and you see somebody like Rockets who seems to have all the physical tools, do you feel like, oh, this is a prospect that you could build into something? Or do you feel like timidity or lack of self-belief or whatever you want to call it is too hard to overcome?
See, it's really tough, right? Because there's guys that are C-class fighters that fight their way up to the A level just on self-belief and grit and guts.
Matt Frivola, right? A lot of it was just grit got him so far.
Yeah, right. Dedication to the actual ugly aspects of fighting, hit and hit back. That was the part of the Rakic fight where I didn't understand because there was no hitting back. Like he would get hit and then he'd retreat, or he'd try to land. And if he didn't land, he would retreat and go back into his stance and do this nice bouncing where he looked smooth and athletic. I brought up Anthony Terrell. Anthony Terrell was by far, if Felder's, if Terrell is a 10, athletically, Felder's a 7.5, right? And I believe Felder's probably a 7.5, and Frivola's a 7.2. And that's how good Anthony Terrell was. I mean, he really was something special. But Felder's one of the best fighters I've ever seen because with what he had heavy bones and he knew conditioning. He would never tire again because he tired in a fight, and he would learn how to anti-wrestle, and then he actually learned how to actual wrestle. His hatred of losing was probably stronger than any other emotional impulse I've seen from another human being ever. Drug addict, sex addict, anyone. Like his hatred of losing drove him to, whereas a 7.5, you can put him in there with a tenor. If that tenor doesn't have what he's got, he's going to find a way to fucking hurt them. You give them enough time. You put him in there for 25 minutes, he's going to find a way to hurt you, make you pay, make you feel it. He hates losing that much. So, I mean, I love to see raw talent, and I enjoy working with them and being a part of the developmental process. But there's something about a kid who has that fuck you for losing, where he hates it to the point where he would rather die than fucking ever be put on his fucking heels ever again. Like that kind of guy, man. And fun to work with.
Building self-belief in some ways might be harder than building like physical skills, right? You've done strength and conditioning and that type of performance coaching before, right? You can make people more athletic, right? That is doable. That is scientifically doable. But trying to get somebody to be more confident, that I think in some ways is a lot harder.
It is. Whether you can overcome it, I don't know. You know, you can still do some pretty great things with a lot of self-doubt, but it'd just be amazing if you could flip a switch and make some of these individuals just truly believe in themselves and see what they could really, really do.
I guess we could tie this all back to your earliest read of Topuria, where he not only had the physical tools, but you talked about that self-belief that he had from day one. So he was that combination where he had the physical goods and he had that composure. He had that belief. So it's like, okay, what do we need to work on then? Not much.
He almost seems bothered by the shtick that is the UFC PR push and marketing push for the fighters. Because like they're not as good as me. I don't want to say what you guys want me to say, or I'm not going to say anything clever because I'm going to beat them. They are not that good. There's a reason why this asshole has to dye his hair purple. I don't.
When they asked him about Max saying he's the best boxer in MMA, he just said simply, let's see. That's it. And then the camera's just on, like, say some more, please. And he's just like, let's see. I have my doubts. That's it. That's all he said. So it speaks to what you're talking about, right? Where he just believes in himself and he doesn't need to overstate it, because if he overstates it, it would have to come from a place of he needs to convince himself. And he doesn't seem like he needs to use you as proxy to convince himself that he's good.
Absolutely. And is there anyone that's knocked out Volkanovski? And does anyone else have a back-to-back title win and title defense that is as impressive as knockout wins over both Max Holloway and a championship win against Alexander Volkanovski? I know of none. And I've thought long and hard about it over the last 24 hours, and I know of none.
I mean, there's a lot of like UFC records, but as far as like most impressive back-to-back wins, that's probably it.
I mean, we're looking at 145 pounds where the talent pool is just always so goddamn deep. And to do what he's done against both of those guys is just incredibly impressive. So I think we're seeing a true generational talent. Eventually, he's going to fight someone who's tall, or someone's going to give him some sort of problems. He'll lose, and then they'll have the haters and the naysayers coming out. But until then, like what he's done, and I think will continue to do, should be appreciated.
Diego Lopez is in his division. And if you're talking about a tall, super fast, explosive, powerful striker grappler, there's that guy. So that's how deep that division is.
Yeah, I just think about the 45ers that like aren't in the top 5 anymore. I mean, there's so many good ones, right?
Movsar Evloev, he's undefeated. He's a monster.
Yeah, I mean, even the ones that just the ones that Ilya had to go through to get there. I mean, how good is Emmett still? I mean, I feel like he could cause a lot of problems for some people. He's a great big power puncher. Man, there's some fun matchups to make. And even if Max goes to 55, there's some fantastic matchmaking to be done there. There really is.
That might be more of like extending his career. I don't know about him being champion at that weight division just because of the size.
Agreed. I think they should pick some specific fights. If some things happen to fall into place where he can make a title run, maybe take a fight that might seem a little bit dangerous. But yeah, I would take some Gagey style fights where he can just, again, put another exclamation point on an already stellar career.
All right. I think that's enough fight talk for this one. Thank you so much for your time, Jason.
You got it, brother. Always a pleasure.
Thank you all for listening. If you like this episode and like what we do, support us on Patreon. We also have the Liberation Martial Arts program if you want to train with us from wherever you are. It's both theory and practice and removes the need for an instructor. What you're learning is how to teach yourself. It's also an approach you can take with you into the world. Sponsors get a monthly training session with me, either in person or online. Supporting me not only helps me pay my bills, but it also helps support my family. Find all our links, including Southpaw merch, at southpawpod.com.